Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Wise Decision Maker. Today we'll talk about the underlying principles of what I do. We'll talk about the Wise Decision Maker Manifesto. That'll be the topic for today, so it's going to be a little bit longer than usual because these are the underlying principles. It's a manifesto, right? We'll be talking about what are the essentials behind making good decisions, and the key takeaway message that I want to share with you is that honestly, the biggest falsehood in advice literature on decision making, whether it's in business, whether it's in relationships, communication, personal life, whatever, is go with your gut. You've probably heard this often. Be authentic, or some variants of it like be authentic, go with your gut, follow your instincts, trust your heart, something like that. You probably heard that, right? The problem is, it's really bad advice. The super common advice is really bad. I'm going to tell you to never go with your head. Never go with your gut. Always check with your head first before making a decision, even if it aligns with your gut or not. You want to make sure to check with your head, analyze your decision before making the decision. Now, I really have to say, I'm really sad, I'm frustrated, I'm angered when I see business leaders with whom I work often. Usually these are not the people with whom I work, but when I see business leaders in the news and just around me, folks I know, who make really bad decisions and bring down their careers and even bring down profitable companies because they choose to go with their gut. It's really sad, it's really frustrating. They trust some fire-walking guru seminar where they went and then they came back and they start going with their gut and they make really bad decisions. Or they trust their intuitions from earlier in their careers when their intuitions were a little bit more aligned with reality. We'll talk about why they were more aligned with reality earlier in their careers, but not later. So this is a big problem, people going with their gut. And I want to tell you to never go with your gut. This might seem a little bit extreme to you that I tell you this, but stick with me. I think you'll hear what I'm saying. I think you'll understand why I'm telling you to never go with your gut, or so by the end of the video, or so my gut tells me. All right. So let's talk about why we should never go with your gut, why you shouldn't, and why I shouldn't either. Well, let me tell you that when I was a kid, when I was a child, my parents told me to go with my gut, follow my heart, trust my intuitions. That was something really important, and that's something I internalized. So when I went to school, I internalized this behavior and I behaved with other kids in a way that was authentic to me, that I felt good about, that I felt was true to who I was. I told them about stuff I was really fascinated with. And that time that was military history and intellectual conversations. So naturally that made me the most popular kid in school. Not. I was kind of marginalized, I was a little bit of an outcast, but I kept behaving that way because I felt this was the right thing to do. My parents told me they probably know what they're talking about. And as a kid, it's kind of hard to think about, well, is this what your parents, are they telling you the wrong things, right? When I was a teenager, a little bit more in my rebellious phase, I was kind of rethinking a lot of things, including that piece of advice. And that led me to my interest in decision making. Why do people, that was one of the things that led to my interest in decision making. Why do people behave the way they do, including towards me? And why do I behave the way I do? Why does following my intuitions really result in this bad advice, in this bad outcome? When I learned about this topic, I did the research on this topic, started reading some of the scholarship, I learned that following your gut is actually really bad advice. It really leads you into the wrong direction if you're not naturally inclined to do what other people enjoy and appreciate. It causes you to have bad social interactions, not a good idea. So unless you're just happen to like what the majority of people like, you will not have good outcomes from going with your gut in your relationships to them. So I started changing my behavior. I didn't behave in an authentic manner. I behaved in a way that would appeal to other people. And really, I pretty quickly became part of the in crowd. I remember someone saying to me, hey, you used to not be cool, but you're cool now. And those words really struck me. I remember that. I still remember them. I mean, the person who told me these words probably has no idea that they are striking, but they're still in me. I feel a strong sense of connection to those words, and I feel kind of proud that I was able to change myself and behave in an inauthentic way, but one that got me to my goals. And here's the research behind this. Recent research shows that we're not evolved for the modern world, whether in business, whether in school, whether in any other social interactions. The large majority of what we do doesn't look like the ancient savannah. But our gut intuitions, our emotions, our feelings, our instincts, that's what they're evolved for. And for the sake of our bottom lines, for the sake of our relationships, for the sake of effective, good personal, mental, and physical health, it's very important to avoid trusting those primitive, primal, intuitive instincts and instead be civilized. Choose to follow learned behaviors, which is the essence of civilization, right? Learned behaviors. Learn behaviors that lead you to your goal in making good decisions and having good outcomes for yourself. And that way, you'll address the dangerous judgment errors that scholars in cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics, like myself and many others, call cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are systematic and predictable errors, there are over 100 of them, that we all tend to make because of the way that our brain is wired, because of our evolutionary heritage, because of the savannah, and so on. This is a big problem. So if our intuitions are such a bad match for the current world, why do so many people, so many gurus tell us to follow our gut, to follow our intuitions? Because trusting our instincts feels very comfortable to us and to them. And more importantly, for them and for us, we tend to choose what's comfortable for us. So not only does it feel good to us, but we choose what's comfortable, what feels good. Because if it feels good, it feels right. The good feeling, this feels good, it also is the same thing as it feels right, regardless of the fact that it may not be the right choice for you at all. Just like it wasn't the right choice for me as a kid to behave in an authentic way if I wanted actual social relationships with people in my school. So that's a big problem. So unfortunately, you get this advice partially because gurus who tell you, advice literature that tells you to do what's comfortable for you, they get the big bucks. People don't want to hear that they should do what's uncomfortable for them. People who speak uncomfortable truths usually get ignored, rather than people who say do what you want to, and they are the ones who get supported, get popular, and get paid. Now, let me give you an example. What would you rather hear about? Someone describing some delicious, delightful, delectable dozen donuts, or someone telling you how to maintain your physical health? Can't you just imagine that box filled with those donuts? They're so delicious. That Boston cream pie, that's my favorite actually. Chocolate glazed donuts, I like those too. Strawberry jelly, custard, chocolate sprinkles, lemon cream, that's nice one there. So delicious, I'm making myself hungry. Now, you might be getting hungry as well hearing this, and you would really rather, your gut would really rather listen to that than someone telling you uncomfortable truths about how to maintain your health if perhaps you're not maintaining your health as well as you could be, which describes most of us. I'm not perfect in that regard either. Go with your gut. That advice to go with your gut is the equivalent of the dozen donuts dessert, of business advice, of relationship advice, of any other advice. That's the equivalent. The box of donuts contains more calories than we should eat in a day. However, our gut wants the donuts. It doesn't want the healthy but much, much less intuitively appealing dessert of having a fruit platter. So too often we choose a dessert that's not really good for us, and we know in the back of our head it's not really good for us. And the same thing with a business option. We choose a business option, relationship decision, or so on that's really not good for us. But we regret it later, but we choose it because it's very comfortable and appealing to us in the moment. In the ancient savannah, why is this important? Well, why do we choose to get the dozen donuts? In the ancient savannah, which is where gut is adapted for, it was crucial to eat as much sugar as possible. That's what enabled us to survive. Our gut reactions still push us to eat as much sugar as possible, regardless of the fact that it's not very good for us. So regardless of this harm in the modern world. And at the core, making a business decision based on gut reactions is like eating a dozen donuts instead of the fruit platter. Unfortunately, many business decisions that are like this, going with your gut, are actually much worse. than eating a dozen donuts instead of a fruit platter. So at this point, you might be hesitant about what I'm saying. You might tell yourself, hey, I've had a lot of advice in my business, in my relationships, my personal life, following my gut intuitions. So great for you. Now, unfortunately, the term gut reactions is a very fuzzy concept. It's not clear. It describes both very useful and very trustworthy behaviors that we've developed and quite harmful tribal primal reactions. So, for example, there are a lot of counterintuitive behaviors that you might have learned. You might have learned how to delegate effectively without micromanaging. That's a really hard behavior to learn. It's very unintuitive to us, but you learn that. You might have learned how to manage your time effectively. That's a really hard behavior to learn. Can you think about it? It's not intuitive at all to manage our time effectively. Maybe you learned how to hear a sales pitch and immediately recognize whether it's good for you or not. That's a hard behavior. It's not intuitive at all. Maybe you learned to not interrupt your spouse when they're speaking. That's a very unintuitive behavior for us as well. So all of these non-intuitive behaviors are behaviors that you have learned over time. And your decisions in these areas might be very quick, might be very intuitive and very accurate. You might feel in your intuitions that you're going with your gut, but what you are essentially doing is following a pattern of learned behaviors that you've internalized, and you've turned them into the equivalent of instincts. Just like you learned how to drive a car. Right now, you're not thinking about how to drive a car, you're just driving it. You're driving it automatically. And that's good, it's bad to think about all the ways that we're driving a car. So those instincts are quite trustworthy. Now, think about it. You wouldn't let someone drive a car without taking a driving course, would you? Of course you wouldn't. But business leaders don't go for a decision-making course and get a decision-making license in order to go up in their positions of authority and become decision makers from the basic level to a position of authority, and then from that position of authority to an even higher and higher authority. They simply observe other leaders do what they do, and they internalize the behaviors of those leaders, both bad behaviors and good behaviors. Unfortunately, what happens in our minds is that we can't tell the difference emotionally. We can't tell the difference between tribal behaviors, ones that are instinctive and have come from the savannah, and behaviors that result from healthy, learned patterns where we make very quick and very accurate and very effective decisions. It can feel just as intuitive to grab another donut as it can feel to delegate your decisions effectively, to delegate effectively to a subordinate, or to not interrupt your spouse while you're talking to your spouse. That's why you should never go with your instincts, and you should never go with your gut. Instead, you should evaluate whether each internal impulse you get is coming from a place of accurate, learned, effective knowledge, or if it's coming from a new area where you don't have a history of making quick, effective, critically important decisions, or even not critically important, but just quick and effective decisions. If you don't have a history of making those decisions, or if you don't have a history of making necessarily accurate decisions, then you don't want to trust that instinct. We often feel, this just feels right, or this just doesn't feel right. Don't trust that instinct. It's often going to be based on the savannah environment. It might well be one of the over 100 dangerous judgment errors that we call cognitive biases that we tend to make as human beings. So what you want to do is verify with your head, analyze the situation rather than going with your gut. Even in cases where you think you can rely on your intuition, it's best to just slow down and take the time to check with your head to analyze the situation and make sure that you're making the best decision for each situation. And of course, it's a minor decision. You don't take too much time to think about it. If it's more of a major decision, you want to take more time to think about this. Now, I'll give you an example where it might feel that you know a lot about a situation and you can trust your instincts, but it might seem surprising that you actually can't. So let's say you know someone for a while and you know them pretty well, you have an accurate read on them. And you get together with them, let's say a business collaborator, and you get together with them one day, and they seem really weird. They seem really hesitant, they're shifty, they're uncomfortable, they seem stressed. And the usual response to that, according to extensive literature on deception, lying, and so on, is to simply not trust that person and say, okay, I'm not trusting what this person is saying. That's just, bad. What actually happens in reality is that this person might have just gotten some bad news. Their spouse might have been in a car accident and they're worried about what's happening in that situation. Or they might have gotten some really bad business news. Their critical supplier might have pulled out and they're worried about what to do. They're still having the meeting with you. So you shouldn't prejudge in those situations. In fact, there's extensive research, and you'll be surprised by this, showing that the CIA, the FBI, various police agencies, and the NSA, they really can't, the security officers, the officers who work there, can't tell whether somebody is lying or not. They score about as well as dart-throwing chimpanzees on determining whether someone is lying or not. The only agency, actually in the United States, whose officers can really determine whether someone is lying or not, statistically significant probability, is the Secret Service. So FYI. So if the CIA can't do it, you probably are not going to be that great at doing it either. So you want to decrease your confidence in knowing whether someone's lying. I'll give you another example. Think about market changes. This is one of the biggest causes that brings down successful careers and large companies, successful companies, failing to notice important shifts in the market contexts. In those cases, your extensive experience in the market, your success, right, your successful career, your successful business is actually causing you to make the wrong decisions. You're kind of like a fish out of water. You're making decisions based on a context that's not true anymore. So it will cause you to miss crucial new threats and new opportunities. It'll be really bad for you. You don't want to do that. It may bring you to, in fact, and has brought many people to ruin because more nimble competitors, younger people who haven't been in your business for as long, but who can observe the shifting market, or newer companies that are more nimble than your existing large business, are able to adapt to the market shift much more carefully, much more quickly than you can. So that's another example, one from relationships and one from broader strategy. I'm going to tell you something that might make you feel uncomfortable, even more comfortable. Is that traditional business strategic advice meant to address these things is really, it doesn't work very well. Let's just say it that way. Because it doesn't take into account the judgment errors that we tend to make as human beings. I'll give the most prominent example here is SWOT, where a group of business leaders tries to figure out the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats facing their organization or the project. Now, the problem with SWOT assessments is that they really, by and large, fail to account for the cognitive biases we tend to suffer from. So that group that gets together and thinks about these things, they tend to very often suffer from problems like groupthink, where they align on the opinions of the most prominent leader in that group, the most prominent, powerful person. And as a result, their assessments of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats just happens to be the same as that person's, as opposed to getting their various opinions together and figuring out the actual strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. That's just one of the many problems with SWOT, and I can name many others. Unfortunately, SWOT and similar assessments provide a false sense of comfort and security. I've seen this really often. People do the SWOT and they think, we're safe, we did the SWOT, we're okay. And they result in really bad oversights that often lead to business disasters and career disasters. You don't want to do that. So I want to get back to my story growing up, because this is important for how I learned and decided to focus on this stuff, and why making judgment errors in business and addressing judgment errors in business is really important to me, and I think to you. So I had that idea that going with your gut is already pretty bad when I was in my early teens. Then I came of age. So I was born in 1981, and around the time the dot-com boom and bust happened in the late 1990s, early 2000s, I was becoming an adult essentially. And so I started following, really seriously following what was happening in the world. And it was pretty shocking to me when I was looking at this, that smart business people invested many millions, billions of dollars into companies that really didn't have a profitable stream of business. It was really unclear to me how Webvan or Pet.com or these other companies would actually make a business. Many of them were, they would say they're ahead of their time, but that means that they're not profitable and they wouldn't be profitable for another 2 decades or something like that. It was a really bad situation. And so when the bust happened, a lot of people lost millions and billions of dollars. That was very sad for me to see. What was even more frustrating were the accounting scandals that were happening. Oh God, that was incredibly frustrating. The accounting scandals with Enron, Tyco, and WorldCom, that was really terrible, where prominent top-of-the-line business leaders were engaging in scamming investors through fraudulent market practices, for reporting false profits. They used illegal accounting practices in order to cover up their losses from the dot-com boom and bust. So that was what was happening. Now, this was far from all business leaders. The large majority of business leaders at that time were quite ethical. They honestly reported their losses. But unfortunately, these huge top companies, WorldCom, Tyco, Enron, they used fraudulent practices to cover up their losses. Now, these leaders, the leaders of these companies, they must have known that their crimes would have been discovered eventually. They must have known that they would receive huge financial penalties and go to jail, as many of them did, for their crimes. But they still kept committing their crimes. It seems irrational on the face of it. Why would they do that? Why would they risk their reputations and their lives, the jail sentences, to do so? Well, the best explanation for this seemingly irrational behavior comes from them following their gut, comes from them choosing the dozen donuts instead of the fruit platter. So it's not like just to be clear, it's not like they needed the money. They got 1 more year of huge salaries, right? They didn't need the money. They had plenty of money already. They had plenty of money in their bank accounts. They still do. What happened based on later investigations into it, into the machinations, into their motivations, is that their desperate, increasingly desperate lies and scamming of many investors, including largely people who were working in these companies whose retirement accounts were destroyed, it came from them not wanting to be seen as failures. They didn't want to be seen as failures in the eyes of fellow peer business leaders. That was the biggest motivation. Not wanting to be seen as failures, wanting to be seen as winners as opposed to losers. Now, I coach and consult with a lot of business leaders, and I have conversations with them. And this fear of failure is one of the biggest drivers of business leaders. One of their biggest things that causes them to function, that causes them to wake up, go to work in the morning. They do not want to be seen as losers, they want to be seen as winners. And money is just a measure of comparing who is a bigger winner and who is not. They have way more than enough money to live on. Money is just a means of keeping score of who is the winner and who is not. Their identity, their ego is very often tied into being seen as a winner and not being seen as a loser. Their social status is tied to it. If they were losers, if they became losers as opposed to winners, for many of them, it would really be an intolerable blow to their sense of identity, to their sense of self, to their sense of who they are. Have you ever felt that way? Can you empathize with them? Now, think about it. Regardless of your social station, what would it be like for you if your peers saw you as a loser? Imagine their side glances when they think you're not looking. Imagine what they would say about you behind your back. Imagine when they're thinking about you, that they're shaking their head and thinking, how far that person fell from what a high position. Can you imagine yourself doing something that you otherwise wouldn't to prevent that situation? I think some of you can. This is a drive to win. It's one of our primary primal instincts. It stems from the savanna instinct to climb to the top of the social tribal hierarchy because that guaranteed survival and procreation for us, survival and for our children to spread. So that was really important. It remains one of our most potent motivators, most powerful motivators, far from all of us, but for the people who tend to become business leaders, it really is. For people who tend to get ahead, this ambition, drive to win, it becomes a very potent motivator. It does a lot of good. When harnessed to good social outcomes, it does a lot of good. I have to say, it does a great deal. I'm ambitious. I want to win. I am sure many of you do as well. But unfortunately, it can also lead to a lot of damage, a lot of evil, as it did with Enron and Tyco and WorldCom and the Ponzi schemes, Bernie Madoff, all of that. It can lead to terrible outcomes with a great deal of suffering. Now, why do I care about suffering? Well, my ethical, moral code is utilitarian. So I care a great deal about doing the most good for the most number. That's what being utilitarian means. Utilitarianism, that's what it's about. So being utilitarian, I want to prevent suffering. I really, really, really want to prevent suffering. And as I saw that, and with my existing knowledge of decision making already from being an early teen and studying this stuff when people were behaving in not very nice ways toward me, I decided to continue my study. I decided to become a coach, consultant, speaker, and trainer for mainly business leaders and their organizations. And this was something I wanted to do because of how much business leaders impacted the people around them. Think about it. They run huge companies or small companies or mid-sized companies, but they still impact a great deal of people. And if they make the right decisions, unlike the leaders of Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco, their employees and other people around them, their communities, will be in a much better shape and will have much reduced suffering. So that's why I decided to do what I do, to help them fight cognitive biases and make the best decisions for the sake, again, of themselves, their organizations, and societies, community as a whole. Unfortunately, the biggest disasters have to happen to people who were often the most successful. And here I'm coming to something I mentioned in the beginning, why these disasters happen to people who are most successful, like the business leaders I work with, I consult with, I coach with, I train. They usually occur for a couple of reasons. One is that these successful people tend to use what worked for them in the past. I mentioned this as a problem when you're working in a specific market and the market shifts around you. It also happens when your context shifts without the market shifting, but your context shifts. Let's say you go from one company to another, and you tend to do, you go from being the CEO of one company to the CEO of another, or the COO of, or the CFO, or the CFO of one company to the COO or the CFO of another company. And you keep doing what you're doing because you know that worked. But in the new company, it doesn't work for some reason. And you don't intuitively understand that what you're doing is not working because you have a strong sense of confidence that you know what the right thing is to do, which is what worked in the past. Or if you get promoted from a lower level position to a higher level position. Let's say you're a lower level manager and you're promoted to a higher level managerial position. That's another context shift. So many people, you might have heard of the Peter principle, where people get promoted to the level of their incompetence, basically where they're not given sufficient training and they're promoted because of seniority, their ability to do the previous job, not their new job. So that's one problem. They get put in a new context without sufficient training, they don't succeed. Another problem of that promotion, higher level, is that they get cut off. Increasingly get cut off from sources of information on which they could rely on and which they could trust. The higher up in an organization you go, the less reliable information becomes. It's just the case. Unless you really fight this hard in your organization, it's just going to be the case that the reports that go up are going to be less reliable, they're going to look better than they are. Because people don't want to share negative information and pass it up the chain of the hierarchy chain, because you have the shoot the messenger effect, which is one of the cognitive biases, also called the mum effect, where people who convey negative information up the chain of command are punished for it. It's a big problem, it happens very often. And this tendency explains why people who are successful at a lower level fail when they get promoted to a higher level, or people who are successful in one company fail when they go to another company. And that's something to really watch out for. And so if you learn about these dangerous judgment errors, however successful you are right now, you're going to be head and shoulders above others who have not learned about these dangerous judgment errors. And especially if you learn about the specific steps you need to address them. Learning about these dangerous judgment errors, to use the previous metaphor, is like learning that you should eat healthy things. Well, gee whiz, right? Who cares that you should eat healthy things? Now, it's important knowledge to have. It's important knowledge to have that you should eat healthy things, that you will get fat and you will get obese and you'll have various health problems if you eat unhealthy things. But if you don't have the specific healthy things that you need to eat and what you need to avoid, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. You're not actually going to be able to accomplish your goal of eating healthy things. And learning about the specific techniques that I talk about in the Wise Decision Maker Manifesto and many other places in my content to address cognitive biases is what you'll need to do in order to take the steps to address these dangerous judgment errors. Now, I'll also strongly encourage you to spread this information into your workplace. Other people in your workplace might not intuitively appreciate immediately the information that you shared, because many of them will trust advice to go with their gut. They heard it all often. It will take a lot of time, a lot of exposure to this new information to change their ways. But keep at it. They will really appreciate it in the end, and you can forward them the Wise Decision Maker Manifesto and other content that I create to help them understand why it's important to change their behavior and go with strategies that are not intuitive, that are uncomfortable. Now, this is something that my personal code of ethics, utilitarianism, impels me to spread. And I hope you will help other people who you care about avoid suffering the consequences of dangerous judgment errors as well. And I hope that you will spread this information. Here's the key takeaway from all of this. The choice that feels most comfortable to your gut is often the worst decision for your bottom line. Far from always, but often. That's why you should never, never, never simply go with your gut, and you should always check with your head. And there are lots of strategies that you can adopt. Effective strategies, but they're counterintuitive, they're uncomfortable, but they're highly profitable. Highly profitable for your bottom line, for your relationships, for your health. That's what will help you avoid disasters and maximize your success by making the best decisions possible. All right, so I want to again encourage you to check out the Wise Decision Maker Manifesto. It goes into this in much more depth with a lot of links that you can check out. It's linked in the notes to this episode. My goal, as always, is to provide you with extremely high value in helping you avoid threats and seize opportunities and solve various problems that you might be experiencing to make the best decisions. I hope I've been able to do that by talking about the underlying principles of why you should never simply go with your gut and you should always check with your head. And I want to ask you, now that you've watched this, what do you think about the dangers of going with your gut? Share about this in the comments section. And if you like this episode, please click like and share it with others who you want to help avoid decision disasters. Make sure to click subscribe so that you don't miss any content on these effective, counterintuitive, uncomfortable, but highly profitable strategies to avoid decision disasters. And you can learn much more in my book on this topic. Unsurprisingly, it's titled Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Business Leaders Avoid Disasters and Make the Best Decisions. The best free resource I can offer on this topic, if you're not able to get my book at this time, is to sign up for my Wise Decision Maker course. It's, again, linked in the show notes. I hope to see you on the next episode of Wise Decision Maker, and wise decisions to you, my friends.